Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about, continue our discussion about mindfulness practice and how it may influence our level of happiness. So as a quick recap, over the last 3 weeks, we've been discussing, firstly, how our ideas about what brings us happiness doesn't actually bring us happiness. We have an idea that as long as we get more of whatever we want, whether it's money, material things, cool stuff, respect, career, relationships, as long as we get more of that, we'll be happier. And when that doesn't happen, our thinking is that, oh, I must not be getting enough of it, so I better put more energy and effort into getting more of what I need or what I think I need to make me happy. So then it becomes like an endless cycle, because the more you get, the less you feel that you're happy, or you don't feel as though you're getting the happiness that you deserve. And then you just try to work harder, and get more of whatever you think will make you happy. And in the end, it doesn't. So that's what we found. And that's also been shown by the research. Then we talked about how gratefulness is one way of uplifting our levels of happiness. So we talked about keeping a gratitude journal where you write in it once a week, and that's the optimal frequency, once a week, and look back on the week and write down 5 things that you can be grateful for. Then you can also practice like being grateful for small things in your everyday life. So that also requires that you are mindfully aware, so that your mindfulness practice also helps you in that respect. So those are the things that we talked about over the last few weeks. So tonight, I want to talk about another practice that you can do to, again, boost your levels of happiness. Now, about 15 years ago, I was coming back to Malaysia from Korea to visit my hometown. And I got to Kuala Lumpur and was transferring from the airport to the train station. I had to catch a train. So as I was getting to the train was right down at the bottom. As you know, usually the platform is like maybe a floor or 2 floors down from the ticketing hall. So I had a lot of baggage, which were mainly filled with presents, since I hadn't been back for quite a while. And that day, the escalators were out of order. They weren't working. So I had to, they put some big signs and blocked it, and I had to take the stairs, walk all the way down. So I had these big bags, and they were a little heavy, but they were bulky, and it was very clumsy. I also had a big kind of rucksack on my back. So I was kind of struggling, not very elegantly down the stairs, and it must have looked like I was being fairly clumsy, because 3 young women came up. It was around just after lunch, I think, walked past me, and then they stopped, and then all of them said to me, "Hey, uncle, do you need some help?" So I felt a little embarrassed, because I didn't think I was old enough to be called an uncle. So I just said, no, it's okay. I'm fine. I'm fine. So then they looked at me and said, "Are you sure?" And I said, yeah, I'm sure. And then they carried on up the stairs. And I continued to struggle a bit down the stairs. So every kind of section, I would just stop a bit just to catch my breath and make sure that I had good grip on my luggage. So about halfway down, I just stopped, took a little break, and from behind me, this hand just came around and grabbed my biggest suitcase, the biggest one and the heaviest one. And then before I really had time to react, I saw this man lift up the suitcase and just start to carry it down the stairs. And I knew, straight away that it wasn't a robbery because it was too heavy. You couldn't really run with it. So then as I looked more clearly, I saw he was an elderly Malay man with a little white cap, wearing a little white cloth cap on his head, which meant that he had been on a pilgrimage to Mecca. So he was carrying my heaviest bag down the stairs for me. And then when he got to the bottom of the stairs, he put it down and he looked up at me. I was still standing there, a little shocked, and just smiled and just nodded his head. And he turned, then carried on his way. He didn't even kind of wait for me to say thank you or whatever, I'm not sure. I can't remember if I managed to blurt out like terima kasih or something like that. So that was a really amazing experience, because once that happened, I noticed that I felt kind of like, wow, that was amazing. I felt this kind of surge of warmth inside. I felt that people in Malaysia or people in KL are really nice. They're really helpful. And I felt warm and happy inside. So it wasn't actually when somebody does something kind, the person who does it, I'm sure he also felt like, I helped that young man, I'm an old guy, but I managed to help the young man. I'm sure he was felt happy inside too. But I also felt happy. So both parties actually benefit from an act of kindness. And so that's actually very good reasons why we can practice being kind to each other. Another time, much earlier than that, when I had been a monk for about maybe 3-4 years, I was in Seoul catching the bus back from the city back to the temple. It was completely crowded. Most buses in Seoul are crowded. And I had my big rucksack with me. And then it was pretty heavy, and everybody was standing, except for the few people who were sitting down. Then there was a gray-haired old lady, sitting down right next to where I was standing. And then she looked up at me and started to tug at my robe. And then she smiled, and then she pointed at my rucksack. Then she sort of made this give me sign, and I thought, what's going on? So then I just shook my head and said, no need. But she was very insistent. She kept tugging at my robe and pointing at my rucksack. So eventually, I just to stop her from continuing to tug at my robes, I took my rucksack off and gave it to her. Then she just grabbed it and then sat my heavy rucksack, on her lap. She's a complete total stranger. And I was like, wow, what's going on? Then after a few minutes, I realized she was helping me take the weight off my back, as well as giving me more space to stand. So she had that rucksack on her lap the whole time until I got to my stop. Then when I got to my stop, she just gave it back to me, and I carried it and stepped off the bus. And when I stepped off the bus, I was like, wow, I was smiling, and I thought, oh, that's a really nice person, really nice thing to do, Like, nobody had ever done anything like that to me in my whole life, People usually in, other cities, I thought this is something special about maybe Korea or Seoul. But everywhere else I lived, people just would avoid making eye contact with you. Even people who maybe deserve a seat on the subway were standing. Some younger people would just pretend they didn't notice. So that really made me feel very happy and warm inside. So that was another amazing experience of this little acts of kindness that can really help to make you feel that, we're all human and we can help each other. So I'm sure also she felt happy. So I was kind of blown away by that. And, I set my attitudes towards, like, at least city life in Korea really changed, because she wasn't the only one, but I've encountered like different experiences where people, total strangers, kind of lent me a helping hand. So these acts of kindness actually don't only boost the doers' levels of happiness, but they also boost the recipients. Like I've been on the receiving end of it. So many studies and experiments have been done on kindness and how it relates to our levels of happiness. And I'd like to share with you a couple. So the first one is this, about done by Elizabeth Dunn at the University of British Columbia in Canada. And what they did was a very interesting thing. They got a group of student volunteers, and then they gave them an envelope. So inside this envelope was 5 Canadian dollars or 20 Canadian dollars. And included with the money were instructions. And the instructions could either be one, please spend this money on a gift for yourself. Maybe you want to pay for your expenses, buy yourself a nice meal or coffee, or maybe a manicure, but please do it before 5 p.m. today. Then in the other envelopes, they would have this instruction. Again, it was either 5 or 20. It was random. Please spend this money on a gift for someone else. So you can buy someone else a manicure, buy someone else a meal, a gift, box of chocolates, a cake, whatever, but spend it on somebody else instead of yourself. Then that evening, all the researchers would call all the people who were given that envelope that day and ask them how happy they were feeling, and as well as how they spent the money. So what they found was that people who spent the money on others, and the term for it is called pro-social spending, were actually significantly or measurably happier than those people who spent it on themselves. And it didn't matter how much they spent, whether it was 5 Canadian dollars or 20 Canadian dollars, the effect was the same. If you spend the money on somebody else, you are happier than actually spending it on yourself, which was completely opposite to what they predicted. They thought, the people who in the experiment predicted, the volunteers themselves thought, if I spend money on myself, I'll be happier. I'll buy something I want. I'll treat myself to a nice cake or, chocolate ice cream. But actually, spending it on somebody else actually made them happier. But then there was a question. Maybe in Canada, the standard of living is so good, so high, that $5 or even $20 doesn't really make much of an impact. It's not such a significant amount of money. But what happens in places where people are much less well off. And money is actually a big part of their daily concern. Like they need to be able to find enough money to get a meal that day for themselves and for their children. What happens in that situation? What will happen in a situation where money is actually very, very tight? So, fortunately, Elizabeth Dunn's husband was able to he was working in Africa at that time, and was able to get some researchers to work on this, firstly in Uganda, then in South Africa. So in those countries, they really don't have a lot of spare cash. Everything goes on to the daily expenses, food or medicine or whatever. And they repeated the experiment. And in all cases, they got the same result. Even if you are much less well off, or you're much poorer than the average Western country, and you're struggling for money, if you spend the money that you have on somebody else, it makes you happier than spending it on yourself. So that is a very, very interesting result. So it's not something that we actually think of intuitively. It's counterintuitive, that actually spending your money on other people actually makes you happier. So that's very interesting. So that means that, and also many people think, I'll be generous or I'll help others when I'm rich. But this actually shows us you don't have to wait until then. Whatever little that you spend on other people, in gifts or whatever it is, actually it's the intention that counts, and it has a measurable effect on your happiness. So actually engaging in this pro-social spending, as they call it, like being kind to other people by buying them gifts and stuff like that, actually boosts your happiness. So that is one form of kindness that we can practice with others. The Dalai Lama said, be kind whenever possible. And then he also added, it's always possible. So it doesn't have to be a big gesture. Small things like treating your fellow human beings with respect as fellow human beings is a small kindness. So, like this morning, I had to go to the vegetable shop, and then I just greeted the owner of the shop. I call him Tao Ge, which means boss in Hokkien. And then, I just smiled. I actually threw my mask, so he probably couldn't see it. But anyway, and after that interaction, I kind of picked a few vegetables and brought it, and he started to talk to me. He said, where are you from? And then we had a small, very pleasant conversation. And, usually nobody ever does that. So I was like, wow, that's really nice. We just had a human interaction. And that made me feel good. So, so the first thing that you can do to boost your happiness is to engage in this kind of pro-social spending. The second thing you can do is to perform random acts of kindness. So again, many studies have been done on this, and especially by this researcher called Sonia Lubomirski. And they discovered that if you do random acts of kindness, like little things, doesn't have to be big things, you can also improve your levels of happiness. So the optimal way of doing it is to do what they found in experiments was to do 5 random acts of kindness in a single day. So you choose one day of the week where you will actively do little acts of kindness. And then that actually boosts your happiness levels. So it can be very simple, like opening a door for somebody coming in and letting them come in before you go out, or saying hello and thank you to the supermarket checkout person, or making a surprise meal for your close friend or your partner, or complimenting a colleague on their work or how they relate to a customer, how they presented something, or even letting somebody go in front of you at a queue, or letting somebody get in front of you when you're in the car. So there are many things you can do, these little things which actually will contribute to your levels of happiness. So that's why we call it random acts of kindness. It doesn't have to be planned so far in advance, just little random things like you say, oh yeah, I can do that. Like I could say good morning to someone who would not really expect it. Good morning to the garbage collector. So all these little things will contribute to your levels of happiness. So there's one movie which I like very much. It's called Dan in Real Life. It's quite an old movie, so I think most of you don't know it. But it has Steve Carell and a French actress called Juliette Binoche in it. And in this movie, there's this really lovely line. The daughter's boyfriend tells Steve Carell's character. Steve Carell is very protective of his daughter, and very suspicious of this boyfriend. And he's leaving. He's actually being kicked out by Steve Carell, who plays the father. And he is in his taxi, just about to leave, and then he looks at Steve Carell and says, love is not a feeling, it's an ability. Then Steve Carell's like taken aback. So similarly, kindness is not a feeling, it's an ability. So kindness, it's not like I feel kind, it's actually performing the act of kindness. It's an ability. It's an ability that you can nurture. It's an ability that you can train, you can develop. So that's all it is. It's a verb, something you do and practice. So the more you practice kindness and also gratefulness, then the more happiness you will experience in your life. And not only that, if I hope you do believe in the Buddhist teaching or the universal teaching of cause and effect, the more that you're kind to others, then the more that others will be kind to you. That's just karma. So sometimes when we feel that people are unkind to us, that's just our karma. So why not make karma work for you instead of against you? So if you start being kind, even to those people who are not very kind to you, eventually others, or you will receive kindness from many other places. So practice of kindness, very, very helpful. So random acts of kindness and pro-social spending. So those are the two practices that you can consider adopting. And maybe try it out for the next couple of weeks and see how that works for you. So Dalai Lama also, the Dalai Lama you can think of as being a very kind, very happy person. Even though he's gone through amazing difficulties, he's lost his country, he's exiled. The Chinese government refers to him as a demon. They really sort of like put out very negative propaganda about him. He's seen a lot of his own fellow Tibetans being suffering and dying. But yet he has this sense of joy about him, you know. He has this sense of, I would sometimes think of him as very mischievous joy. So he's very kind to people, and you know, it's very obvious. And if you read any of his like articles that people were in cases where he meets with people, come away feeling like kind of uplifted and inspired after meeting him, because he has this sense of kindness and joy about him. So he said, and I quote, this is what he said: "This is my simple religion. There is no need for temples, no need for complicated philosophy. Our own brain, our own heart is our temple. The philosophy is kindness. The philosophy is kindness." So that's all we have to practice. So just to wrap up, try practicing doing 5 random acts of kindness weekly, all on a single day.